uh, yeah, this is a video sort of predicated upon, okay, yeah, this is a video predicated upon the Abe assassination. My name's Kevin Miller. I don't know if I've introduced myself. I'm Kevin Miller, kevinspolitics.com, which is a blog that I run, a website that I'm currently keeping updated, focusing on international politics, international relations, as well as international finance and international economics. This video, which is mostly just speaking about the events of the last 2 weeks or so, primarily of which is the Shinzo Abe assassination, the Abe Shinzo assassination, which took place in Japan approximately 1 week ago, last Sunday. It's been sort of he's already been buried back in Tokyo, which was his hometown, and he was laid to rest earlier this week, before the weekend began and let out. But Shinzo, always one of the prominent conservatives in Japanese politics, came onto the political scene. Oddly enough, this was before the end of the Reagan administration, towards the beginning of the first Bush administration, Bush 41. His time as foreign minister was pronounced by Japan's continued rise as a global power and as one of the preeminent economies in the entire world. At one point in time, the second most prosperous, most dominant, most powerful economy by GDP in the entire world. This happened during his time as foreign minister for Japan, during, I believe this was the end of the shogunate at that time, which was the Japanese Japanese emperor Showa, and his shogunate, which was coming to an end. Around that time, his son took over from him, Emperor Hirohito, or Emperor, I believe Emperor, what's that? But yeah, but Emperor Showa, his demise occurred on his watch while he was foreign minister, and that began the end. That was the end of Japanese and the Japanese economy's preponderance throughout the world as the second most dominant economy. And of course, the 90s brought upon a number of stagflationary measures. The Kyoto Protocols failed, which would have curtailed global warming and global policies, which allowed global warming to take place. This was during the Clinton administration here in America. His time sort of preceded him, because of course he came back onto the world stage during the leadership crisis in Japan, LDP crisis of the late 2000s, 08, 09, before he was finally decided to be their prime minister, which would have been his second stint as prime minister. In the 90s, he was prime minister as well. Before Prime Minister Koizumi took the reins to the helm as the head of the conservative Liberal Party, Liberal Democrats. His time will be remembered for expansive economic and foreign policies, which sought to check Chinese and Chinese growth in the region, as well as economic, as well as military growth. His close friendship to U.S. presidents Bush, Obama, Trump, and there again, Biden sent condolences as well, even though Abe had was leaving office by the time, or had already left office by the time Biden took office. He's easily one of the most popular figures that Japan has ever impressively created in politics in the 21st century. He'll be remembered as someone who is easily just one of the most charismatic, one of the most subtle, the most versatile, easily one of the best, most understood, I believe, and most effective politicians that Japan has certainly seen in quite a long time. And outside of Koizumi, of course, with his famous relationship with George Walker Bush after the events of 9/11, and propping up his government and bringing in a more conservative government that is more aligned with the Bush policies, and that was one of the famous successes of the early Bush years, second George Bush Jr.'s years in government. And so Abe Shinzo certainly will be remembered as one of the most effective leaders of his generation, certainly. The cross currents to that were sort of North Korea planning nuclear launches, as well as a number of missile launches which occurred throughout May, and there was at least one in June, I believe, and as early as March and April, they had planned or had already launched several these are their KN-21s, their KN-18s and 25s, 26s, which are capable of going intercontinental. Some of them in the ranges, mostly confined to the Sea of Japan, the Eastern Sea of Japan, or Western Sea of Japan, Eastern and Western Sea of Japan, at one point flying over Japanese islands, which was something that Abe sought to curtail considerably during his time in office. The Yoshihide government sent their condolences, and his funeral was not televised. I did not see anything on YouTube. I did not see anything that sort of would point to a publicly held ceremony or funeral for Abe Shinzo. But again, this ties in deeply to North Korean policy and to policy with China, to burgeoning powers in the region, which he sought to check and contain through his policies, with engagement with the United States and other allies throughout the region, South Korea and Taiwan being chiefly amongst them. There's not really too much left to say about that situation happening in East Asia, where there's sort of a stasis of sorts between nations, There's been threatening saber rattling against Taiwan. In response, the United States has sent over aircraft carriers as well as has commenced arms deals with Taiwan in order to sort of predate any sort of saber rattling or invasion attempts which may occur between China and its coastline with Taiwan. There's been flyovers all throughout last winter. China was flying over Taiwan in a threatening manner. There were several sorties which were reported in the news media. This has not lent itself to a policy of sort of engagement with the rest of the world, which is what China ostensibly is seeking and has stated through its One Belt, One Road initiative and through its currency regimes with Thailand and with India, and so China's insistence that it continue to rattle the saber and threaten its neighbors while also trying to engage with the rest of the world. You see, there was a coup in Sri Lanka. The word on the street is that it was a Chinese-led coup which occurred in Sri Lanka against the Prabhupada leadership, which is sort of the, for lack of a better term, sort of the thugocracy that existed in Sri Lanka that the people had grown tired of. And so a Chinese-led coup sort of changed out that leadership. Keep in mind there's at least $18 billion worth of sort of surf loans to build a new sort of port of entry and port sort of marine port, maritime port for Sri Lanka, so that goods could flow in and out of it, that China had lent Sri Lanka to build the port. And so that's $18 billion that China either remains to be seen. But if they initiated the coup, I wouldn't expect them to necessarily want the money as well, so much as control over the country, which is a bit more sort of disheartening. But it plays into the role of their circumvallation of India as a burgeoning power. As you see, India has nuclear submarines that they're building, aircraft carriers that they've been researching and have been sort of inquiring about sort of possibly purchasing from certain powers. There's been different skirmishes on their border in the Kargil area, which is in northern Uttar Pradesh, between China and India, on Nepal's border, and Bhutan, where Bhutan and Nepal are situated in the Andes Mountains. This has been sort of the precipitated this has all precipitated throughout the last 20 years or so, as China has steadily built itself up as a world power, and India has attempted to keep pace with China as well, as a burgeoning democracy and world power on the international stage, militarily speaking, as well as economically. And so this has been sort of, these are some of the more tense periods that we have seen and that we will continue to see as China, as India, as Russia declines and those two powers rise, India and China, we're bound to see more conflict in that part of Asia, as well as in Africa, and and maybe situated closer to Iran and Afghanistan, as since the United States have left Afghanistan, and Iran and India are certainly interested, as well as Pakistan, are certainly interested in moving into that space in order to sort of extract the resources from that country, if not from the regime itself. In other parts of the world, there's been a number of, well, back to China though, with its mortgage crisis. China's had sort of a lack of a lack of mortgage, a lack of growth, which has stymied mortgages being sent out, or accepted, mortgage contracts accepted by banks to be able to give them to commercial loans to companies and to commercial lenders. Small, medium, and micro lending has been severely curtailed because of Xi Jinping's policies, is how it is being played in the media. The reality of that is America's insistence that China sort of clean up its act with a lot of this what's going on in the northwestern provinces of China and its Xinjiang province, where there's Muslims who are of ethnic Chinese heritage, but practice Islam, and they're being persecuted for their religion. And so there are those in the U.S. Congress and Senate, Marco Rubio chiefly amongst them, Josh Hawley, sort of the younger Republicans, as well as Democratic leadership in the Senate and the House of Representatives, who feel that sort of reining in China's domestic policy can only be done by influencing its global ambitions, and that includes its economic policies for the rest of the world, as well as domestically. And so there's been a number of different economic embargoes that have been instituted upon China, sort of part of broader economic U.S. economic engagement with the world. Has included sort of a burgeoning sanctions regime against certain parts of the Chinese economy and the Chinese government. We have yet to see how that's going to influence America positively, but so far we've seen sort of stagflationary environment has been talked about. We've seen high inflationary environment here in America. We've seen a number of sort of calls that we're in a recessionary environment. I believe that when the numbers are all said and done for the second quarter, it will be that ended June 30th. They're gonna definitely comment on the fact that 2 quarters of negative growth is all that it takes for a recession. We had first quarter growth was recessionary, it was negative growth, and so the second quarter will be negative growth as well, I predict, meaning that we are officially in a recession right now. And so it remains to be seen how that's going to affect the U.S. economy. That's my prediction, is that we are currently in a recession, and that will be sort of announced probably in early August, around immediately following rate hikes by the U.S. Fed, where they've seemed to have reined in monetary policy at the Federal Reserve, and that meant increasing rates dramatically I predicted that they wouldn't do so in June. They in fact did so increase rates in June. I predicted that if they increased them in June, they wouldn't do them in July. I do now predict that they will in fact increase rates in July, is what I'm predicting. And so the sort of modus operandi of that means that they're increasing rates in order to beat back recessionary environment, as well as to curtail gas prices, which have been precipitously inclining. So we're going to see a number of different things going on there that will sort of make for a less propitious environment for spending, and a more propitious environment, or a more suitable environment for savings and different money market instruments and CDs, certificates of deposit. And so I wanted to get into a lot more. I wanted to talk about Argentina. Alberto Fernandez's government had the bailout. Also had a resignation. Martin Guzman has resigned from the Ministry of Finance in Argentina immediately after negotiating, or in the middle of negotiating a bailout with the IMF, $44 billion bailout with the IMF. There was an additional bailout up to $4 billion from the Paris Club, a group of influential nations: France, United Kingdom, industrialized nations, United States, Canada, that he was renegotiating an additional $4 billion, was supposed to, before he resigned. His replacement is a senior government official who happens to be an economist. This bodes well, I suppose, for Kirchner, for Christina de Kirchner, who was hoping to return to power, though I see it plausible that she is not attempting to return to power herself, but is instead attempting to influence the elections, which may happen if Alberto Fernandez's government collapses, through her son Maximo Kirchner, who is a minister of parliament and is head of the I believe the Campeores movement, which is a youth movement which supports Kirchner as well as Alberto Fernandez's government. Christina, who is currently vice president in Alberto Fernandez's government, would like to see, would like to see Maximo Kirchner become prime minister if Alberto Fernandez's government does in fact collapse through a sort of a more localized elections. I think is what she's hoping for. She's hoping for elections which are more local in nature, and then she can piece together a coalition outside the capital in Buenos Aires, which would bring Maximo to power. And so that is sort of what she's hoping for, as well as a youth vote in the capital, and then a coalition outside the capital, which in the Andes and the southern portions of Argentina, which would bring her son Maximo Kirchner into power. And so that's what I'm foreseeing, and that as well. I wanted to talk about a lot more, but it's getting late. I just wanted to sort of touch on these things and talk about them at another time. Basically, condolences to Shinzo Abe and his family. Thank you.